Hi, I'm Dr. David O'Malley from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, where I am proud to lead the Division of Gynecological Oncology. In the GOG Partners, I'm really honored to be the ovarian cancer clinical trial lead. And I'm joined today by Dr. Kara Matthews, my good friends. Kara, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Kara Matthews, and I'm here at not the Women and Infants Hospital of Rhode Island, but Women and Infants Hospital. And I spearhead a lot of our phase 1 trials here, and also I'm an active member of the GOG Foundation and NRG trials. And I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited. You know, Brown and Women and Infants is one of the highest accruers in all of GOG Foundation trials, to include GOG Partners trials. And we're here to talk about clinical trials today, right? So Kara, you guys are amazing at this. I mean, really, one of the top 2 to 3 every year when we're looking at this. Tell me, how do you do it? How do you prioritize clinical trials?
You know, I think that it really becomes a philosophy of a program. And at our core, I think that we really believe clinical trials are really for the patient's best interests. It's not about wanting to do clinical trials for academic purpose, although I really enjoy that part of my practice. But it's really about what's in the best interest of our patients. And I think that we really and truly believe that it is for the benefit of the patient population that we treat to have these clinical trials available, and really to put forth the extra effort to enroll patients, because a lot of times it is more work. And I think that we have really adopted a philosophy of what trial is this patient eligible for, and is that a good choice for them, rather than is this a patient that should go on a clinical trial? And I think that that's a different question and really important to think about in your practice.
So it sounds like it's a culture. It's built into your culture. You think if we're going to improve the care of women with gynecological cancers, the way to do it is through enrollment on clinical research. And so one of the things we started doing at our tumor board is the first answer is what you want to do is the expectation is what's clinical trial they have available or eligible for, and then if they're not, what are the standard of care options? I talk about platinum-resistant ovarian cancer all the time, right? If you look at the contemporary outcomes in platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, the contemporary objective response rates are 10% plus or minus a couple percent. I mean, it's ridiculous in the objective response rates. When we look at developing drugs, and you know this, right, in phase 1 going into phase 2 and higher, unless you really hit that 25% response rate, it doesn't really go forward with development. So you're looking at double to tripling what the contemporary response rates are. So it's really amazing. That resonates with me. What's the best thing for the patient? Best thing for the patient, and for example, platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, I think is clearly clinical trial. But now, tell me, when you're looking at this, how do you prioritize? You guys have a ton of trials open. How do you prioritize which clinical trials to enroll your patients on?
Yeah, I think number one is really always what's in the best interest of the patient. And so, as we develop more and more specific cues of clinical trials, I think we're experiencing that we have to have more trials open to have trial eligibility for patients, because there are so many nuanced eligibility criteria. And so really looking at, what is the patient's previous treatment? Are they eligible for a trial? And then in the big picture, we do prioritize, if we have 2 equal trials that we think are of equal benefit, we do prioritize NCI trials through the NRG, and then other trials after that. And I think that's a different answer for each institution. We do not have a lot of our own investigator-initiated trials with a lab to support. And so I think that in different settings, that might be a different answer for each institution.
So you're an NCI designated cancer center. You're prioritizing those in order to satisfy the requirements for your core grant, right? You're looking at those options. But you said from investigator initiated, you don't have as many open from there. So that's how you're kind of setting that up, right? So if you have Okay, so I'm trying to think about this out loud here. So as I put these in here, when I'm looking at a trial and I have 2 or 3 trials, do you ever think about how to sequence this, though, meaning, if they go on this trial, that's going to eliminate that trial, or how are you sequencing those when you have a patient you may be able to get on 1, 2, or even 3 clinical trials?
Yeah, and I think your example of a platinum-resistant ovarian cancer patient is the really good model to talk about this, because we know that, with really low response rates of traditional therapies, I try to explain to patients, we're going to try and get every single option available for you. It's a question of putting these pieces together so that we get every possible choice, and we can always do standard of care later, by me writing a prescription for something. And so we look through, okay, a lot of times I'm thinking about, okay, this trial can have 2 prior lines. This trial can have 3 prior lines. So thinking about the number of prior lines and sequencing it so that patients will be available down the road. And then we do have a lot of phase 1 options available as well. And so we think about those as later phase trials for patients, even though they're phase 1, because oftentimes those do not have a line limit. And so really thinking about the number of lines is probably the first kind of prioritization for us.
And that makes a ton of sense. So when you're thinking about which trials you're going to open, for example, platinum resistant or now recurrent endometrial, recurrent cervix, we have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5 trials open. So you're saying, okay, is this overlapping? Because they all compete to some degree, right? Is the inclusion exclusion criteria enough separation? For example, number of prior trials, if they have required tissue testing, in that case, is that worth opening? Can we enroll in that trial? And then sequencing when you get in. That's what I'm hearing.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that's interesting is so many of our trials now are either mandating prior BEV or no prior BEV or prior PARP or no prior PARP. And so it's really a changing landscape to think 2 moves ahead on the chessboard about, okay, this is the way we were treating our patients and this is who's eligible now, but maybe a year from now that will be different as well because everyone will have received a PARP at that point. So it's kind of an interesting academic exercise as well.
Well, and being honest with patients with regards to, I tell my patients all the time, let's be honest about the progression-free survival. Okay, in a platinum resistant, you're looking at 3-4 months. So if I only have 4 or 5 options in the platinum resistance, that's a year. But if I can get you on 2 to 3 more trials and each one of them have 3 to 4 months, and goodness gracious, if I hit a home run on something, I get a year or a year and a half, like has been happening a lot recently, you just markedly improved your time you left on this earth, and hopefully with better tolerance because we're getting smarter with these developmental therapeutics. And so I'm really open and honest with patients now. It used to be, oh yeah, you'll be fine. We'll get you. The reality is they get 3 or 4 cycles and they move on. So you can bring 3 to 4 more agents in with a better chance for a longer duration. You're really impacting the time these patients can have on this earth, and again, hopefully with better quality of life.
Absolutely. And actually, as you mentioned that, I thought about another thing I think is important in the sequencing. As you know, on the MIRASOL trial, you need a tissue testing sample. And so for a lot of these trials, you can sign a pre-consent for the tissue testing for eligibility. And so we really try to move that forward, even though that doesn't mean they have to necessarily start immediately. So trying to move some of those steps forward as well.
That is a fantastic segue. And the next question I want to ask you. So tell me, do you have algorithms set up that help you answer some of these questions? How do you do it?
Yeah, so we have 2 different forms depending on the preference of the practitioner in our practice. So we have the verbal written form in a booklet fashion, and then we also have the visual kind of schema by disease site. So for example, in ovarian, we have frontline, then you have ovarian recurrence, platinum sensitive, 2 prior lines, platinum sensitive, 3 prior lines, platinum resistant, number of prior lines. And so we have both the visual schema and then the long form description of the trials available. And we use those in tumor board. We use those, they're printed in clinic. We have a research assistant in clinic helping us continuously screening patients for who might be eligible for things. So those are all useful tools.
So you're making it really simple for your practitioners because this is your passion, right? This is what you do. But not everybody is abreast of the 10, 15, 20, 30 protocols you have open, right? So you're saying if you have a patient you're seeing in there, a lot of times the C125 is increasing, but I haven't gotten a CAT scan to confirm, the progression yet. So you're looking at that algorithm. They've had 3 prior lines, 1 for PROC and 2 for platinum sensitive. And here you're making for your practitioners, here's what the options are.
Exactly. So it's immediately accessible all the time.
That's amazing. You know, I think as we look at this, not every institution is going to have that many trials, but it's something really to keep in mind, especially when we're talking sequencing. The other thing that I think that brings up, it becomes very obvious where the holes are in your portfolio. If you're going down for recurrent endometrial and you don't have anything, you're like, okay, we need to get a trial. We need to call up Katie Campbell at GOG Partners, say, Katie, please consider me for this next endometrial cancer trial. So, you know, we found you're right. We got the NCI trials with the ETCTN, which is the phase 1, phase 2 through CTEP mechanism. We have investigator-initiated trials. So for us, we're going to prioritize the investigator initiative. We made that commitment to that investigator. That's going to be the first priority. And then because of the NCI Designated Cancer Center, we then prioritize the NRG or the NCTN trials and the ETCTN trials, which are smaller. And then from there, we look at pharma trials, which GOG Partners takes the higher lead, right? And then non-GOG Partners pharma trials down there. So that's how we usually prioritize. But we found that in platinum resistant, for example, you know, we had patients who were eligible for 8 clinical trials. So I have 8 clinical trials open between phase 1 that for platinum resistant. And again, this is, and I was overwhelmed at times, and this is, you know, clearly, you know, where I want, you know, my love, right? So what we started doing is we did a schema and it will show up here on the screen. We did a decision analysis. And so the first question we asked is, do you have tissue or can you wait for tissue testing? But you just alluded to a beautiful process, which is don't wait for it, get it before they progress. So you don't have that 2 to 3 week delay. So do you have time and do you have tissue testing? Yes, no. And then from that standpoint, are they a candidate or do you prefer weekly paclitaxel? Because we have 1 or 2 weekly paclitaxel trials. And then from then we utilize the tissue testing and if they're not a weekly paclitaxel to make those decisions. So instead of having 7 to 8 choices, now we have it down to 1 or 2 based on the algorithm, and tissue testing takes the priority because, for example, you mentioned Mirasol. The positivity rate's about 40%. So I want to make sure I don't miss any of those patients, right? And we have a lot of other trials that's, you know, plus or minus, you know, 40, 50%. So I want to make sure I capture those patients and give those patients the option. As we wrap up here, Kara, this is, you know, again, women's and infants is really, literally for decades, has led our clinical trial enrollment in GOG Foundation, GOG Partners, and now the NRG. And I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your leadership. Any final advice for the people out there today listening? You know, what's the 1 or 2 things that you really want to emphasize or additional advice?
I think just really thinking about this as a part of your clinical practice is really important in terms of embedding it and how do I deliver the best care possible for my patients. And I think it's something that really keeps me excited as well because I feel like I always have things coming down the line that are improving patient care. And I think we all have experiences where you sometimes have tough days with our cancer patients. And it's really the most exciting part of my practice now is really the new drugs coming down the line and the opportunity to use those. So really thinking about how do we do the best for our patients and embed this into clinical practice.
How do we improve the care of women with GYN cancers? Don't we all have a moral and ethical obligation to do that? Don't we want to leave the world a better place of doing, you know, beyond, you know, I tell my patients all the time, it's not just, I hope it benefits you, but it's benefiting the greater good. How you enrolling in this clinical trial could help generations of women. Think about what we've done in the last 5 to 7 years. So it comes down to culture, right? You have to have that point of emphasis, improving the care of women with GYN cancers, and having a plan in place of how are you going to get patients on clinical trials? How are you going to sequence, and what algorithms and processes do you have in place to make sure you're maximizing? I had a blast today. You are amazing. Thank you so much for taking this time for me. Thank you for all listening. please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.